The Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app and streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980, where you see via FaceTime. We got Lynnell with us for an Overreaction Tuesday. We're back on a Tuesday, Lynnell. We're doing Tuesday on a Tuesday.
I was about to say, it's actually a Tuesday. That means the overreactions will be hot and overreacty.
Hot and overreacty. Put that in your dictionary, Webster. All right. So you and the boss and Anthony were apparently yelling at each other in the hallways yesterday about Kirk Cousins. Fill me in on what happened here.
So Anthony walked by just to chop it up. I think it was during one of you guys' commercial breaks. Just came to come by and say hi. And then CK overheard Anthony asking, "What do you think about Kirk Cousins?" So Anthony actually brought it up, despite what he will say to you. He brought it up, and I was like, "Hell yeah, I'd take Kirk Cousins." And then CK walked by and was like, "Huh? Anyone not wanting to draft a quarterback at 2? You're just a lunatic." And I said, "CK, I guess I'll be talking to you tonight for 3.5 hours on overtime, because that's really, Craig, been my whole premise this entire offseason. And I know people are looking for shock jock overreaction-y takes, as we just made up that word. But, like, I'm more of coming from the approach of, like, look, leave no stone unturned. I have a drinking game that I play with the fans. Clearly, you don't want people to drink and drive, Craig. But we're at the mercy of the evaluator. Whatever Adam Peters and company want to do, whatever the brain trust comes up with at the end of the day, I'm on board with it. Craig, you're somebody that's pretty astute and picks up on little things. Notice when Adam Peters talks about the number 2 overall pick and the offseason, he finishes with the same exact quote is how I'll describe it. "We're going to do what's best for the franchise." He continues to say that. And I think he really means that. And I think they're really doing their due diligence, vetting this process, looking at the veteran options, looking at trade back options, looking at trade up options. And I think that's the right way to go about it. My frustration is like fans and people shutting certain ideas down. Like, I just don't think that's appropriate when it comes to this offseason with this team in particular. We're in year 1 of a rebuild. You can set this thing whatever direction you want it to go and pick up the rest of the pieces later. I obviously know how important it is to have a franchise quarterback. And when you have the number 2 overall pick, that seems like the best avenue to get that. But I always say you got to be Beyonce crazy in love with Caleb Williams or Drake May or Jaden Daniels to even take them with that number 2 pick. We're making the assumption right now that they are, and we're just so early on in the process that I'm not willing to rule anything out at this point.
So I have actually kind of had, I can't call this an overreaction because this has been my take since go, is there are enough teams out there that are quarterback hungry, that are quarterback needy, that if you don't love one of these guys, you should trade out of this pick. And people are like, you have to, and I get it, right? And Sam Fortier did a really good job of distilling the point down into this simple sentence when he joined me on set in Indy last week, which is, you should just take the quarterback at 2 if you like any of them, because when else are you going to draft it 2? And I get that. Hopefully never. But I'd also point out that some of the best quarterbacks in the league weren't drafted in the top 5. Now, some people take that to a silly extreme, which is to say, well, let's see the analytics. You're better off taking a quarterback in the middle of the first round. And no, you're not. If you divide up the Super Bowl championships over the course of time, half of them come from guys who were picked 1-1 overall. That's the nature of it. Those are the best guys. Yeah, and then if you were to take out Brady, who's the ultimate outlier, that number becomes significantly higher because they played 58 Super Bowls now, and he's got 8 of them. So at the end of the day, the percentages of taking a guy super high and it working out are better than taking someone anywhere else. That said, I think that with some other generational type talents in this draft, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is at the top of that list. He's the most scheme-proof wide receiver that we've seen in a long, long time. And if he can be added to your roster plus other stuff, plus this, plus that, okay. If you really don't think there's that big of a difference between J.J. McCarthy and Jaden Daniels or Drake May, then I would trade back and take the extra draft capital and J.J. McCarthy. If you're playing the lottery, you want to have more tickets. But as you said, I think the thing that people miss when we say that is if you don't love. Because if you do and you trade out of that pick, you're a moron. So it cuts both ways. And so it really is, like you said, in the eye of the evaluator. And for the first time in a long time, I actually trust the evaluators here as much as you can trust anyone, given that quarterback is as hard of an evaluation as any position in any sport on the whole entire planet.
And I agree with that. And one thing that like sticks in my mind with people's counter argument to this is, when are you ever going to be in the top five again? The type of capital that you can Knicks, or you love JJ McCarthy, who now seems like he's a lock to go top 10, but I will see it when it happens. I think it's Minnesota at 12 or Denver at 12. Let's just say
Denver's at 12.
quarterback hungry.
Minnesota
right?
at 11, I think.
Yes.
We're almost at the part of the draft process where I know like the top 15 in order. We're getting there.
Yeah.
Actually,
So-
Denver might be 10, and then Oakland or Vegas is 12.
Vegas is 13.
13,
You had it right.
yeah.
Vegas is 13. Minnesota is 11.
11, and then Denver's 12. Yeah, there you go.
So let's just use the hypothetical of Washington trading with Denver back to 12. You would get a draft haul to where, yeah, your record may not be bad enough to pick in the top five, but you're going to have the excess capital to pony up the picks and move up like the other teams are trying to do. So,
And by the way, like if you don't love one of these quarterbacks and they do, and you're right, they're going to suck. So their pick, like it's exactly what Chicago just did with Carolina. Chicago wasn't bad enough to be in the top five, barely. But Carolina sure was.
Exactly. So that's the way that this could go as well. But I think we both agree, and I think that's the point I want to harp on. Like, if they do love a guy, you take him at 2. You don't play games with this. It's something to me where, even if you love Caleb, that's why I'm on board for trading up if you love Caleb, because the capital that you're going to have to give up, it's fine. You're not going to remember it if Caleb ends up being, a generational quarterback that elevates everyone around you. But we're a long way to go in the process. We even kind of got away from what I was initially saying to Anthony. Kirk Cousins would be an interesting option to me if you decided to trade back and still didn't want to take a quarterback in the first round. And I understand the benefits of taking a first round quarterback with a new CBA and you get that 5th year of control. But like a lot of people came out of Indianapolis really drinking the Spencer Rattler Kool-Aid. Say you love that, and he's a guy that you feel like you can get at the top of round 2. You do that, you trade back from number 2, and then you just continue to trade back, is what I'd say. Adam Peters has done his best work in rounds 4 through 7 in San Francisco. I put a premium on those picks. I love the second round picks that we have at 36 and 40, but like I'm now starting to get the mindset of you could really build this roster through the draft, and with how well they draft, you just want him to have as many swings as possible, because you never know when it's going to be George Kittle. You never know when it's going to be Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. So you got to give him those opportunities to swing, which is why, and I know this is me kind of walking back my take. Shocker. I want to trade up for Caleb. I do. But I do understand like the idea of wanting to have as many picks as possible because of how good he drafts, talking about Adam Peters.
Yeah, it's hard because you do feel like you want to have it both, like always. And
right. That's what's fun about this, though.
Yeah, it's like, well, I don't know. Because like we did the exercise last week where Q Myers was on the show from Raider Nation Radio. And I had him play Telesco, and I was Peters, and like he offered me 3 first rounders, and I was like, yes, like sure, I'll take it. And then it's like Trevor Sikkema did it in his post Super Bowl mock, a double trade where you trade back to 12 and then trade up to 10 and take McCarthy, and it's like I kind of like that idea. As I'm warming to McCarthy, especially as there's some reports out of Indy that like obviously he weighed in at a heavier weight than he was at Michigan, and people were like, no, and seeing him, like that weight is real. That wasn't like fake fluff weight. Like he really has already put on some serious muscle, and at such a young age, like he's got the ability to put on even more. So maybe the size becomes less of an issue there in terms of just being able to yank down by one hand by some bowling pass rusher. So I think that it's tough too, because I look at those picks 36 and 40 and I like them, but there's also a part of me that's like, I think they should trade back up and get into that. Like there's going to probably be a run on tackles in the late teens, early 20s. And like, especially now that they've officially let Leno go, I want to make sure I get a first round caliber tackle, not another project in a guy like Patrick Paul or whoever else, whatever your flavor is that's going to be available at 36 or 40 instead of 21, 22. So like there's a lot of maneuvering I think that could happen in this draft. And I think that you talk about like Peters has done his best work in rounds 4 through 7. I think a lot of evaluators look at this as a 4-round draft, that they're going to have a lot of guys going in rounds 5, 6, and 7 that have undrafted free agent grades on them, just because there's not the depth of players, because so many guys, instead of coming out, go back into the portal and get an NIL deal, and they extend their college career by a year, and then maybe they get a 3rd round, 4th round grade next year instead of being a 5th, 6th rounder this year. So there's just so many moving parts, and I think we're still in this post-COVID, very unique like draft situation where the final guys with COVID years are finally coming out. and it's affecting the draft and the depth. And now NIL, like we still haven't settled into what's normal there. So I know that's like a lot of information, a lot of moving parts, but like that's the reality. This is a draft as much as any I can remember. And especially with Washington having as blank of a slate and the roster as they do, where it's like, if there's how many position groups are there on a team? There's like 7 or 8, depending on how you divide up your DBs or whatever. And like, let's say there's 8, and like 6 of them are positions of need. So it's just how do you try to fill all that? Do you even bother trying to fill all that? And oh, by the way, when you talk about a guy like Cousins or whoever, there's $80 million in cap space to play with too.
Yeah, and the thing about, and someone shut down my cousin's stuff last night with like, well, if you sign him to a deal, you're gonna eat up half of your cap space for this year. Well, depending on salary cap gymnastics and how that works, you can maybe, if Kirk wants to backload his contract, you can do that, which is probably not smart because he's an older guy.
Yeah, I think
but
Kirk, just knowing Kirk and the way he does his contracts, like it's going to be a 3-year guaranteed, pretty even deal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I like the idea of potentially, bringing him in if you don't love any of these quarterbacks. But I like what you said about tackle. And I think tackle and receiver, are 2 pretty big positions of need for me when it comes to this team. And I think this draft class is historically good at both of those spots, which is why I agree with you wholeheartedly about ponying up 36 and 40 to go get in that like 20 to 27 range, because I think that there is going to be a run on tackles, and Washington should be able to come away with this draft with a quarterback and 2 starting tackles. Like, I really think you have all the ammunition and capital to do that. I think the players are that good. You talked about the guys going in that second round being viewed as more of projects. I see what you mean by that, because guys are going to get pushed up, and then whoever's left is going to be like, why are you left standing? So,
right. Well, and that's the thing too, is just real quick, like in looking at the Jimmy Johnson draft chart and like, which is how teams kind of calculate how these trades go, the points, you don't have to do 36 and 40 together. That's actually paying too much. For like 23, for instance. So it'd be like 40 and, like a 4th rounder or something like that. And so if you can do that and you still stay, 3 picks in the top 40, that's fantastic. And you sacrifice something later in this draft, or do you sacrifice a future 3rd or whatever in the hopes that, next year you're picking more in the middle of the 3rd round. And, like there's ways to do it. Is kind of the point where you're not all of a sudden going to sacrifice both of those picks unless you're going back up like closer to the top 15.
Yeah, and I wonder, and it's interesting to think, like, we talk about the potential of trading back up into the 1st round for tackle. They've got so many needs that may make sense if you don't, if you're unable to hit on edge rusher and free agency the way that you'd like. I would love to see, and I got a personal, I guess I won't call it a relationship, but I want this to happen because I know the kid. I would love Chop Robinson and Dan Quinn's defense, and the way that he jumped off of the screen out in Indy with his 40 and the shuttle times. Like, he's the best pure get-off pass rusher, and I think he's got not as thick as Micah Parsons is, but it's a similar prospect in terms of, like, the ability to move him around and things of that nature. So I'll say all that to say, like, love tackle is a huge need too, but, like, I just think the cupboard is bare. And I got to take the fan hat off sometimes, Craig, because like I want to look at it and think that my team's not that far away from competing because of the coaching was bad last year. But you're 4-13 for a reason, so I'm all for completely churning this roster and trying to get a bunch of new players in here because you need it, quite frankly.
For sure. All right, so there's another option to get players though, and that's free agency, which by the time we talk next week will already be underway. Let's see if Lynnell's got some free agency targets, because I'm sure he does. Next on the Hoffman Show.
What's up, kiddos? It's your boy Clinton Yates from ESPN. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. Tell your mama I said what's up.